Despite being leaked in November or December, Felix the Shark only came out about 3 months ago now, and it is a collection of scrapped stories from the FNaF series. The book acted as a bonus book, with 3 of the scrapped stories that didn't make the final series. But it really begs the question as to why these stories were scrapped. Was it quality, was it issues that it caused with the lore, or was it another reason entirely? That's what we'll be talking about in this video. We're going to be discussing Felix the Shark, the Scoop, and You're the Band individually and go over what happens in each story, and I'll give my thoughts as to why I think it could have been scrapped. So now, let's get into it. The main character in Felix the Shark is Dirk. One night, when he's playing games with his friends, the topic Freddy Fazbear's Pizza came up. Dirk mentions a character named Felix the Shark who had an attraction with a swimming tube so you could swim around with Felix. But none of Dirk's friends believe him, and nobody thinks that actually happened, which kinda pisses Dirk off. So he goes on a road trip to find the Freddy's location that had Felix the Shark. Eventually he finds it, but he finds out that the owner of this Freddy's location lost his son in the ocean, and a shark pushed his body back to shore. I wish I was making this up, but I'm not. This was the inspiration for Felix, but he also finds out that the writer of his favorite book was the daughter of the owner of this Freddy's location. He also remembers that there were a bunch of random clues in the book that lead to nothing. He visits the daughter and she gives him her butterfly pendant. Using this, and the clues, he finds a bunch of stuff at the water park that Freddy's was replaced with, and finds a way into the Freddy's location. A lot of the building was gone, and what wasn't was covered up. Dirk finds the swimming tube and gets inside. He goes around and sees that Felix the Shark is withered, terrifying and monstrous now. But he realizes that there's no way to get out of the swimming tube, and the story ends with him being stuck in the tube with Felix forever, with no way to escape. I think the reason this story was scrapped ultimately comes down to the quality. While about the first half of the story is pretty good and the ending is excellent, about midway through the story it gets unnecessarily confusing. Obviously that's just FNaF in a nutshell, but the story kinda just goes all over the place. And of course we all know of the infamous yes scene. When Dirk gets all the clues together and goes to the water park, we get a scene of him just solving a bunch of things for like 10 pages straight, and reading a story with the main character just solving stuff, not to mention while he's the only character in the scene with barely any dialogue, and his only dialogue just being yelling yes, is incredibly boring. This part of the story is just so boring. And what comes after isn't that good either. It's incredibly forgettable. I couldn't tell you how Dirk finds Freddy's if you paid me $100. And I honestly think that's why it was scrapped, just because it isn't that good of a read, and it got a little too confusing for Fazbear Fright's story. Some stories are confusing, yeah, but no other stories go as all over the place as Felix the Shark did, so I think it was scrapped because of that. Next up is the Scoop. The main character, Mandy, is kind of an outsider at school. People in her classes often bully her, and she dyes her hair a lot too. She also has an online friend named Lindy who lives in Utah. In the story, she's actually a fan of the FNaF franchise. This probably strikes you guys as the reason it was scrapped, but I don't really think so. One day Mandy decides to look through the FNaF 3 files, and she finds an image named lookshauntednow.jpg. It was a building which she discovered was in Utah. While people online didn't believe it to be real, Mandy knew it was real, so she went on a business trip with her mom to Utah so she could meet up with Lindy, and they went and visited the building. It was now a movie theater called Old Cinemas, which played old silent movies. There, they learned about a kid who went missing 17 years ago named Stevie Robbins, which was explained to them by a man named Jim, who had been working there since before the building was remade into a cinema. Before it was a silent movie theater, it was called Sideshow Snack Shack, and get this, the mascot for the place was a bear animatronic, and the place was a family diner. Sound familiar? Mandy believed this incident of Steven going missing to be the inspiration for the story of FNaF, but throughout the story, Mandy had been seeing a boy everywhere she went, a boy who matched the description of Stevie Robbins. She was also having nightmares where his eyes went completely black and he grew sharp teeth and pounced on her. She returned the next day to Old Cinemas, and Jim allowed her to look in the storage room because it still had a bunch of stuff from sideshows. When she was in there, she once again saw Stevie Robbins, and this time he looked a lot more dead, like his body was decaying even though he was a ghost. Mandy was scared, and she turned and ran away from Stevie, only to find him standing directly in the direction she ran in. Eventually, she sees Stevie climb up the body of an animatronic bear, twist the head, which had its mouth bolted shut, and vanished. Mandy went up and removed the head, and inside the body of Sideshow, which is the name of the bear by the way, was the body of Stevie Robbins. In the end, Mandy is really upset, but she finds the courage to stand up to the bullies, and she also makes a post to her blog saying that she thinks if the creator wanted people to know about the image, he would have told them about it. As I said, you may be tempted to think this story was scrapped because the main character was a fan of the FNaF games which exist in this universe, but I don't really think that's the case, or at least not that by itself. This story was written by Scott Cawthon himself, and I don't think he would have made this story in the first place if he was just going to scrap it because of literally the entire storyline. That just doesn't make sense. I think it makes the most sense if it was scrapped just because it didn't fit with the rest of the Fazbear Frights. I don't believe Stitchline games, so in my opinion, it makes sense for the whole Fazbear Frights series to be in the same universe. There's only a few stories that might not be, but the stories that aren't are probably actually in the game, since Scott originally said that some stories would be, and I really don't think the stories that are in the games are the Stitchline stories, since there's a lot of inconsistencies if that is the case. I think all the Fright stories are either in the Stitchline or in the games, but I think the scoop was scrapped because it doesn't fit into either one of those categories. However, the exact opposite can be said for You're the Band. My idea for why You're the Band was scrapped is a lot more interesting than my ideas for the other two stories, and it's the main reason I decided to make this video in the first place. It's actually an idea I got from someone on Ozone's Discord server. I don't actually remember who said it, but it was actually a very interesting idea, and I think it makes a lot of sense. The main characters in You're the Band are Sylvia and her son Timmy. Timmy had recently been learning about Freddy's, which at this point closed 30 years ago because of the quote-unquote missing children incident. Meaning this story is in 2015, since in this universe, the missing children incident was in 1985. Whether you believe that to be the missing children incident date in the games too, or not, it was in 1985 in this universe. And I say missing children incident in quotes because in this story it's literally stated that the children that were killed were literally found. In the games, this is not the case. My point is that it's not really a missing children incident, but I will refer to it as that just for the sake of you guys understanding what I'm talking about. So Timmy gets into Freddy's and he wants a Freddy-themed birthday party, so Sylvia goes all out. She finds a vintage Freddy mask online. It's really old and dusty and even comes in a dingy, old battered box. But she gives it to Timmy for his birthday and he loves it. After the party he puts it on and a lot of weird stuff happens after he does. Sylvia goes to his room and sees a strange-looking shadow in front of Timmy. As time passes, she sees the shadow a couple more times, but more importantly, Timmy starts acting differently. Things he never liked before, he now likes. Things he liked before, he doesn't anymore. And he's just been saying a lot of weird things. Strangely, she also keeps seeing a guy seeming to be in his early 20s creeping around their house. Sylvia takes Timmy to a child psychologist who suggests going away for a bit, and Timmy, coupled with the strange dude creeping around the house, makes her decide that's probably a good idea. Sylvia and Timmy go stay at Sylvia's parents' house, and while they're there, Timmy has trouble cutting a steak for dinner, so his grandpa walks over to Timmy with a steak knife in his hand, and Timmy, seeing the knife, tackles him to the ground and starts yelling, "Don't hurt Timmy!" Yeah, it's kind of weird, yeah. Later that night, Sylvia hears a bunch of dogs barking and goes inside to check if it was disturbing Timmy, but when she gets to his room, she finds that he's not there and his window is open. She looks out the window and sees Timmy holding hands with the shadow and walking away. She chases after them, but the guy from before pulls her into the bushes. This guy reveals his name to be Mike, and he says he's the security guard at the abandoned Freddy's building, and that the Freddy animatronic's head had been stolen. And so there's a really cool scene where they go back to Freddy's together and save Timmy, and a bunch of stuff happens with the puppet and the Freddy animatronic and stuff like that. Freddy gets his head back, stuff like that. Sylvia gets Timmy back, and everything is okay in the end. This is honestly one of my favorite stories. It definitely belongs in S tier or higher. I used to believe that You're the Band was scrapped due to it taking place in 2015 and Into the Pit also being in 2015, and these two Freddy's locations being implied to be the same building considering they are both the locations where the children were murdered, which we know because of the plot of Into the Pit and the animatronics in You're the Band being possessed. The reason this would be an issue is because that Freddy's location is turned into Jeff's Pizza, which we know had to have been open for at least a few years. That wouldn't match up with You're the Band. But recently, we got previews for the Fazbear Frights graphic novels, where it's revealed that Into the Pit takes place at least in 2020. While the Civil Rise trilogy graphic novels did get some things wrong, it still remained consistent with things that we did see in the original novels, it's just that they were presented differently. But the mention of a reboot of a movie that had recently released in the year 2020 is a completely new thing. That was never mentioned in the original Into the Pit. I feel like this is trying to clear up the misconception that Into the Pit is in 2015. But with all that being said, Year of the Band still is inconsistent with the rest of the Stitch line. In Epilogue 10, it's revealed that the original Freddy's building that was turned into Jeff's Pizza was actually turned into many different restaurants and locations in the year since Freddy's closed. In Epilogue 11, we actually see Larson visiting some of these locations through the ball pit. In Year of the Band, this building is still remaining as an abandoned Freddy's, so this is still inconsistent. But despite the inconsistency, Year of the Band is in the Stitch line, and there's a lot of stuff in this story that utterly destroys Stitch line games. Some people believe this story isn't canon to the Stitch line because it's scrapped, but we know it to factually be in the Stitch line for two reasons. One, the Shadow in Hide and Seek is revealed to be Eleanor in the 10th Fazbear Frights epilogue. The Shadow appears in this story, meaning Eleanor is in this story. And we know it to be the same Eleanor from the Stitch line because 2, Timmy's bedroom from this story makes an appearance in the final epilogue. Doesn't matter what you want to believe, this story is canon to the Stitch line. Someone on Discord doesn't believe this story to be canon because it goes against Stitch line games, but that's genuinely just cherry picking. Saying the story isn't canon to the Stitch line because it goes against your theory is pretty stupid, because in actuality we know it is canon, and because of that, Stitch line games is probably wrong. And honestly, Stitch line games legit doesn't have any evidence in the first place. The only evidence I think might possibly be valid is Tales from the Beats-a-Lex, but only because I'm steering away from spoilers, so I have no idea what the supposed evidence is. But besides that, possibly, I see absolutely zero other evidence whatsoever. And if anyone says the ultimate guide, I swear to God. So if this story is canon to the Stitch line, why was it scrapped? Well, since it's a part of the Stitch line, I believe it's technically not a scrapped Fazbear Frights story, but rather a scrapped movie screenplay. Remember that post Scott made called Bad News about the FNaF movie? That was over a year and a half ago, but the movie still hasn't started filming, though according to Jason Blum, the FNaF movie is one of his top priorities. I really do hope the FNaF movie comes out within the next couple of years, and I hope it ends up being good. But the scrapped screenplays were honestly one of the coolest things about that movie announcement, because not only were they scrapped ideas for the movie, but they also gave us a touch of lore, like confirming Cassidy is a really important character throughout multiple decades, unlike her role under Stitch line games. He also confirms that he likes to have protagonists who have a good reason to go to the restaurant, and more importantly, to stay. But in that same screenplay where he said that, you may find some similarities to You're the Band. I'll read out the screenplay for you. The Misfit Kid screenplay. Basic setup, single mom brings her kid to a new town, kid finds Freddy's, hilarity ensues. Problems. One of the problems in creating a modern day story with an old Freddy setting is finding a way to connect the protagonists to the restaurant, finding a reason for them to be there, and finding a reason for them to stay. The problem here was that the reason for this kid to go to Freddy's and have misadventures was too contrived and too forced. Verdict, not a bad setup, but it just didn't work. If I don't care about the characters, then there's a good chance no one else will either. Pass. This was going to be the screenplay for a while because it didn't have any serious flaws. I ultimately decided it just wasn't good enough though. This screenplay's storyline matches the storyline of You're the Band very well. The single mom part matches with Sylvia, the kid finding out about Freddy's taking place in modern day and there being an old Freddy setting, all of that matches up. The only thing that doesn't really match up is bringing him to a new town, but I mean, that could just be like a extra story or whatever, I don't know. What if You're the Band wasn't actually intended to be a part of the official Fazbear Frights series, but was actually made to be kind of beta for the movie screenplay that Scott planned to be for the actual movie? I think maybe he wrote You're the Band as a prototype of the movie screenplay in story form as a way of seeing if it would be good. As Scott said, it's good for the most part, but there are a couple of strange things about it that are a bit wonky. Eleanor appears in this story solidly connecting it to the Stitch line, but her appearance is a bit random and doesn't mean all that much to the actual story. But maybe after Scott realized this story wasn't good enough, he kept the story to release it in Felix the Shark. In summary, You're the Band isn't a scrapped story, it's a test run for the screenplay Scott originally wanted to use for the movie, made to figure out if the storyline for the movie would have worked, and when it didn't, he used it for the bonus book because he was still proud of the story. but he also connected it to the Stitch line, probably for fun or to establish that Stitch line games isn't true, in case that could have been misconstrued when the Ultimate Guide or Tales came out, which of course it did. But speaking of Tales, it's coming out in less than a week. I'm really excited to read those stories, and when I do, I'll be doing summaries for each story, and once I've done all 4 summaries, I'll do a theory discussing every theory I have about all 3 stories and the epilogue. I'll probably also do a FNaF theory discussion with some of my friends too. But before Tales comes out, I'm planning on doing a live stream replaying Security Breach to refresh my opinions on the game, and also refresh my mind on the game. I'll probably do that stream either tomorrow or maybe Monday. Not Sunday, I'm busy on Sunday, but whatever. But until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, then please do leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!